Spring is just around the corner for us, but if you live in Canada, you know that this is a season of many false starts. We get one day of warm weather and then we're hit with a nasty ice storm the next. Instead of finding this discouraging, which don't get me wrong, I do, I try to use these cold days to stock up on some staples so that when the warm days do hit, I'm able to be outside and not worry about getting anything else done inside. Today I'd like you to join me as I stock up on some basic staples in our house. For those of you who are new here, my name is Justine. I'm a homeschooling mother to 7 living in Ontario, Canada. My husband and I bought this property about 3 years ago, and here we have cows, sometimes pigs, and grow a large garden to provide most of our food. The first project I decided to tackle today was rendering some lard. We had 3 pigs butchered in the fall of 2024, and I'm just now getting around to rendering the lard. I have been dragging my feet to do this, but we are running out of our lard, so I figured it was time I finally got around to dealing with it. It's just been sitting in my freezer, hanging over me this whole time. I decided this time around that I would try to cut some corners by cutting the lard a little bit bigger than usual. It did work, but I will say that the results weren't as good as when I usually cut the lard in much smaller pieces. So as much as this was a time saver, I don't think I'll be doing it again. If you are interested in rendering lard, but you don't get your pigs butchered, so you don't have that option, you can always go to your farmer, if that's where you're buying pigs from, and ask them to provide you with the lard from the pigs that you may buy, or you can go to the store and ask for some extra lard. There's different ways of getting it, but basically you're going to be getting a big bag of pig fat, and on it you're going to have fibrous tissue, and you're going to have little pieces of meat. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get rid of all the meat that's still left on the fat and any fibrous tissue that is looking a little nasty. Sometimes they stamp the pig too with like these blue stamps. I go ahead and cut that off because I don't really trust the dyes in it. I know it's probably food grade, but I just avoid it and cut those bits out. I try to get all the pieces about the same size so that they render all at the same time. I'd say they're probably about 1-inch cubes. This time I'm cutting them much larger. Like I said, it didn't work, so really keep them as small as possible. And then once I'm done cutting them up, I will put everything in either a roaster or a slow cooker. I have done this on the stovetop before, but I did find it incredibly stressful to have to babysit the pot all day long because you don't want to just leave oil sitting on your stovetop without supervision. So now I just use the roaster or the slow cooker depending on the amount. And the key here is to cook it low and slow. I took a quick second to make sure that baby was okay. He's just sleeping in that little bassinet we have in the corner, and that's how I get most of my work done, is during his nap times. And while the lard was rendering, I decided that I would deal with some old bananas. Now we have a lot of bananas in the freezer already, so I didn't want to put more in there, although we do use them for smoothies all the time. It was just I have too many in my freezer. So I decided I would dehydrate them and turn them into banana chips, which is a really simple snack to make. The first thing you're going to want to do is peel all your bananas and then slice them about 1/4 inch thick. If you slice them too small, then they get all weird in the dehydrator and they stick to the pans because they're not thick enough, and then it's a nightmare trying to peel them off. So about 1/4 inch thick is pretty good. I also use these silicone mats on top of my trays so that I can pop them off easily. But if you don't have those, it's not a big deal. You can always just lay them down. As long as they're thick enough, they shouldn't fall through the grates or get stuck to them. When you lay them out on the dehydrator trays, just make sure that you're spacing them out pretty evenly and none of them are touching. So you're going to continue getting good airflow in between the chips and they're not going to stick together or dry at uneven rates. Once they're all cut up, I will stick them in the dehydrator for about 6 to 12 hours. I know it's not a very specific amount of time, but it'll depend on your dehydrator and how efficient it is. I put it at around 135 degrees Fahrenheit. If you wanted to do these in the oven, I would do the same thing but put them on a cookie sheet, and then I would dehydrate them on the lowest setting possible in my oven and check them every 30 minutes or so to make sure I'm not overdoing them. The kids enjoy having these over yogurt or with granola or just as a snack on its own. The next project was finishing up my bone broth. I always have some kind of bone broth going every week, and this was from the chicken that we had over the week. To make bone broth, I just take the carcass of whatever chicken we ate. I put it in the slow cooker. I add water to cover, and then I add a couple glugs of apple cider vinegar. I turn the slow cooker on, and I leave it on for about 12 to 24 hours, checking it halfway through. Once the water has halved, then it's good to be strained. The water had halved at this point for this broth, so I strained it out, and I got this beautiful golden, it was really gelatinous this time, broth. Sometimes I'll add chicken feet to it too, so if you have chicken feet or you can purchase chicken feet, add a couple of those to your bone broth as well, and it makes it very gelatinous. I think that's probably why it was gelatinous this time now that I'm thinking about it, because I added more feet than usual. I noticed with this batch that even though the water had halved, the bones weren't quite falling apart. So when this happens, I will start another batch of bone broth using the exact same bones, using the exact same process, and this one might not turn out as jiggly as the last one, but you can still use it to flavor something like rice. After this, I checked on my lard. When you're rendering lard, you're going to want to stir the lard around quite a bit to make sure that no pieces are sticking to the outer edge. Now you see the pieces are a little bit bigger. They're not rendering down as quickly as some other pieces are. And so the lard's turning a little bit darker than I would like, which means that it's going to taste a little bit porkier, which is not a big deal. You can still use it, but it's definitely going to have that piggy taste to it. The next day, the weather had not improved, so I finished up the lard. I had turned it off to almost not even on at night, and I was able to get the cracklings out early that morning. I don't recommend doing this. You should deal with your lard right away, but I had a cranky baby that night who just needed me to hold him, so I decided to try and wait on the lard. I strained out the cracklings, which are the little bits of tissue that are left over, and I was left with this golden brown liquid, which is darker than what I'm used to. But again, like I said, it's still usable. Just don't use it in baking or anything where you're going to want a very light flavor. So it should be fine for something like cooking eggs in, or a recipe where you won't mind that porky flavor. The banana chips were all done as well, and so I pulled them out of the dehydrator after turning it off and letting them cool down, and now I can pull them off the silicone mats and keep them in a jar with a tight lid on top. They were a little bit darker than usual, and I think that's because I was using older bananas instead of newer ones, and the sugar made them cook a little bit darker than usual, but they were still delicious and the kids still ate them. Since the following day was just as gloomy outside, I decided to take the opportunity to make some honey cough drops for the kids since some of them weren't feeling too great. To do this, I take some honey and put it into a pot. I used about a cup of honey, and then to it I added about a quarter cup of apple cider vinegar. Now both those are really great for your throat. I don't know if you've ever tried the apple cider vinegar trick where your throat hurts and so you take a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and it miraculously goes away. I mix those up in a pot and I let it come to temperature using a candy thermometer. You can use water in order to check to see what stage your sugar is at, or the honey, I guess. But I find it easier just to use a candy thermometer, so now I know I'm not messing it up. I get it to the hard crack stage, which is at about 300 to 310 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I remove it from the heat and I put it on parchment paper so that it can cool down. You can also put it in the fridge to cool it down a little bit quicker, and if you had candy molds, you could use the honey in those, but I don't have any of those, so I just decided to break the candies up with my hands. These remain quite sticky, so to stop them from sticking together in storage, I just sprinkled them with some icing sugar, and that stopped them from getting all squashed together in the jar. I left my lard to harden in a large pot overnight in the fridge, and once it was hard enough, I decided to break it up into different plastic containers so I could freeze it. If you poured your lard directly into a glass container, you could technically keep it at room temperature without any issues as long as it was rendered properly, but freezing it does extend its life. So I go ahead and freeze mine in plastic containers that I can pull out of the freezer whenever we're running out. And people ask me sometimes, why lard? Like, why do you cook with them? How do you use it? I just use it in place of butter in a lot of recipes. If it's a little bit yellower and porky, then I might not use it in baked good. But it's actually so good for you, and I think there's a lot of misinformation surrounding the use of this fat, especially if you're using pigs that were raised outside in the sun. There is an incredible amount of vitamin D in lard, and especially when you live in these cold climates, it's important to get vitamin D in your diet. So that's how we manage to get vitamin D during the winter in our farmhouse. The very last project I was able to tackle is one of my favorites, and that's making sauerkraut. I eat sauerkraut with pretty much everything. I eat it with breakfast next to my eggs. I'll eat it with lunch on top of a soup. I eat it with supper pretty much no matter what we're having. It's just a great side to have, and it's full of probiotics, so that I don't need to worry about spending money on an expensive probiotic from the store. I know I'm getting it in my food. Not all my kids like sauerkraut, but the majority of them do, and so I encourage them to take some as well. So we go through a lot of sauerkraut, and I find myself making it once every couple of weeks. I was running low, so I got some cabbages from the store. Cabbages is actually one of the vegetables that is on the Clean 15 list, so you don't have to worry as much about getting it organic. I used to get it organic when I did not have it in my garden, which we don't at the moment because we're in the middle of winter. But because of the rising grocery price, it's nice to know that I can still buy conventionally grown cabbages and still have the health benefits that I would get from cabbages that I grew in my own garden. So to do this, you need to take your cabbage and slice it very thinly. And once you've done this, put it in a bowl or any kind of container that's big enough to hold it, and add a few tablespoons of salt. Now you don't want to use iodized salt, so use like Himalayan salt or Redmond salt or whatever you have on hand that does not contain iodine in it. I use about 1 tablespoon of salt per medium-sized head of cabbage, so these were a little bit bigger and I put a little bit more salt in it. But what you're going to want is once the salt has sat on top of your cabbage for a few hours, it breaks it down and makes it easier for you to massage it. I know some people wait just half an hour and then they massage it for like 10 minutes. I don't have time for that, and why do extra work when the salt is going to do that work for me? At the bottom of your bowl, once you're done soaking that cabbage in the salt, there's going to be its liquid that it's brining in that's been extracted from the actual cabbage. If you taste that liquid and it tastes salty like the sea, you have added enough salt to your cabbage. Now see here, this is after sitting for a few hours and the cabbage has shrunk down quite a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and put it in my half-gallon jars. And the key here is to pack it in tightly. So I put it in with my hands first, and then I'll take that big wooden rod. I don't know what the name of that is. If someone does, let me know. It came with a fermenting kit that I bought. And I smash it down as hard as possible to make sure that there are no spaces left between the cabbage leaves and that there's no room for any bacteria to grow. So you want to store it as tightly as possible. This is also a good way to get rid of any extra frustration or stress that you may have felt throughout the day by just pounding it as hard as you can down into the jar. Once I'm done this, there should be a little bit of water left, like I said, at the bottom of the bowl. You're going to want to pour that on top, and if it doesn't cover the entire amount of cabbage, you need to create some more brine. So to do this, you're going to want to take about a quart of water and add a tablespoon of salt, mix it together, and then pour it over the top of your cabbage so that nothing is exposed to air. I bought these little fermenting weights that I put on top of my cabbage to keep all the cabbage submerged, but if you don't have those, you can always use a piece of the cabbage heart and pop it down into the liquid so that everything stays down. If things float up on top of the brine, then there's a chance that they will mold and ruin your ferment. So you really want to make sure that you're picking any little pieces that float up after you put your weight on, and you're keeping it nice and clean in there. Afterwards, I put my fermenting lids on top. If you don't have those, you can just use a regular lid. Don't screw it down tightly, and every couple of days, open it up and let the extra liquid and gas that builds up out. I check mine in about 5 days. I don't like it too fermented, but you could go as long as 2 weeks maybe. Keep trying it and see how you like it, and you can decide for yourself how many days you want to leave it on your countertop. And that's it for me this week. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe. I'll be here again next week with another video, and in the meantime, if you could hit the like button on this, I'd really appreciate it. It just helps the algorithm get this video out to more people. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great week. I'll see you next time.